Good morning, Buck Bookers. It is the once and future King Buck, and I'm here to bring you another thrilling episode of Buck's Books. I am joined by my unconscious attorney. He is snoring over there under the heat vent, but I'm sure he will gurgle or something over the course of the reviews and summaries to come and make his presence known. I want to start by saying Happy New Year. We made it. We got another one on the books, fellas, and that is agenda neutral. Fellas, we are all equally fellas under the Lord. And on that note, I want to go a little bit off script this time around. I know I was playing during Captivate saying that it's going to be a little bit heavy and dark and spooky because of the fact that pickup culture is gross. But this is actually going to be a little bit, just a scooch heavier. This is actually my second run through of this video because the first time it wound up too heavy and I didn't want to bleed that much on the internet. So this one is going to be hopefully less heavy and hopefully shorter than my first attempt. But I wanted to review a sort of bookend situation for 2024, right? There's the first book that I began reading in 2024, January 1st, and then I read it for the entire duration of the year because that's how the book was designed to be read. And then I ended it with the actual title of this one, and that book is called How You Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable About Anything, yes, anything, by a clinician and psychologist named Albert Ellis, PhD. The book that I began 2024 with is the Bible, and it's one of those one section a day Bibles, right? ESV. And as I'm going through it, it's divvied up into a big old chunk of the Old Testament, a smaller chunk of the New Testament, a psalm of some kind, usually leaning very heavy into the word steadfast love, and then a proverb. And I'm big into the Proverbs. I like the Proverbs because that's like the art of war, you know, they're like little stoic aphorisms, but like if they were written by desert pastoralists instead of Roman emperors or Chinese generals. Why am I reading the Bible? I am a deeply secular buck. I was raised in a sort of culture of very cringe Reddit atheism. This was many years before Reddit was around. So this was like a proto Reddit atheism, you know, this was a Richard Dawkins situation. I wasn't baptized until I was something like 4 years old or something, and there was like a huge controversy between my parents about it. So I didn't have what you'd call the traditional religious indoctrination when I was a kid. I had a brief experience with Catholicism around 12, but I also had severe ADHD, and when you present a 12-year-old the option of either going to church to listen to these liturgies he doesn't understand or play Mortal Kombat on his day off from school, it's going to be Mortal Kombat every time, every single time. It has to be reinforced externally by someone that the child respects, and there was no one that I respected that went in big for religion. There was just nothing to be done about it. So why would I be reading the Bible now? Well, I read the Bible before, matter of fact. But I just blasted my way through it to say that I had read it, and also to more efficiently argue with Planned Parenthood protesters in college, because I lived 2 blocks, not even, from the Planned Parenthood, and Repent America would show up and they'd be just screaming at these poor teenage girls, early 20-something girls who were just going in for, most of them were just going in for birth control, you know, or sexual health exams, and just these old ghouls, this horrible woman who had adopted 15 children and she made them stand out there with her like human shields while she's out fighting what she perceives as the good fight. Don't kill your baby, mommy. You know, it was ghastly, and I didn't like any of it, but I do like to fight. So I went down and I'd argue with them, but I needed to learn more about the Bible in order to argue with them. So I read the Bible specifically to argue with them about the finer points of the religion that they didn't really understand. So that was a lot of fun in college. But here are the reasons that I actually read it this time around, right? So the first one is I read some goofy paleo book. I don't remember which goofy paleo book, but it was definitely one of the more intellectual of them, because most of them are just like, oh, don't eat peanuts, eat nothing but beef and carrots for perfect health, like cavemen. That's why cavemen lived forever. And cavemen didn't live forever. Although, cavemen did tend to live about as long as we do now. And that's without medicine. That's assuming that they broke the child mortality barrier there. So when you see all of these statistics that anthropologists sort of just invent based on bones, because you got to remember an anthropologist is a bone looker. Like, they show up and they're like, this looks like it has ritual significance, but they don't know anything. This is all just conjecture. The entirety of the science is conjecture. So I love anthropology. Take it with a grain of salt. They're just making things up. So when an anthropologist says that the average human lifespan during like caveman days was 40 years, 30 years, 40 years, that is a distorted average because of how many children died. So overwhelmingly, infant mortality was huge before the advent of modern medicine. And when we say modern medicine, we're only talking about the past 100 years or so, because before that we had barbers leeching and bleeding people, you know? Oh. But generally speaking, if you live past 15, even 10,000 years ago, you were pretty well set up to make it to 60, 70, 80, especially because your food was better and your lifestyle was more active. And you can Google this. I'm not making this up. Go ahead, search it. I dare you. Go ahead. So, the Paleo book was talking about how the dude was theorizing that the Bible had been written initially as a means of providing a specific, like, codification system, this Code of Hammurabi situation, for the specific cultures in which each of the testaments existed, right? So when you look at the Old Testament is specific to, like, the early Israelites. We have these largely nomadic pastoralist tribes bouncing from place to place all over the desert, like the modern Bedouins, or the Maasai, even living off goats there and sheep, a lot of sheep. You'll notice there's a lot of sheep talked about in the Bible. There's a reason for that, because they were a shepherd culture. That's what they did. So how, assuming that you're only going to know like 60 people over the course of your life, it's a self-governing system. You know if one of them is bad. So it's cool, like within this little tribe, this little culture, to have the eye for the eye and the tooth for the tooth. It makes sense, because we all know that guy, and we all know he's a sociopath. So like, he's out here stealing and raping and killing. We gotta crush him with a rock. That's what you do. You beat him to death with a rock, and the equilibrium is restored. Everyone's happy. So, but it's not just about the justice. It's also about the hygiene, you know? So a lot of the rules that apply to kosher were early efforts at hygiene. You know, that if you interact with the corpse at all, you gotta not do anything for a bunch of days. You gotta wash your hands constantly, a lot of hand washing. And the food that they ate, you know, talking about Leviticus, talking about Deuteronomy, all of the goofy things that you hear, like the main talking points for Reddit atheists, like, you can't wear polycotton blends and you can't even eat shrimp. Well, you can't eat shrimp because all those years ago, and even now, shrimp are bugs from in the water, and they're bottom feeders. Same way as oysters. They're bottom feeders. They're filter feeders. So if something's wrong with the water, that goes into the shrimp. That goes into the oysters. And then you eat the oysters and you get food poisoning, and we don't have a hospital. We just bleed you. Bleeding and prayer is what we have available. So like a little spot of food poisoning from eating tainted oysters will kill you, and if you die, that's a huge loss to the tribe that only knows 50 people. So as a result of these practices, Jewish people tended to survive plagues. They tended to survive everything better than most other people, and that was very suspicious. But it's only because they were clean, dude, because they had the book telling them to be clean in a time before cleanliness was a consideration of any kind. And then you look into the New Testament, and the New Testament, at the point of the New Testament, we're no longer nomadic pastoralists. At the point of the New Testament, we're living in these mega cities like Rome. So everything's different. We know way more than 50 people, and they can just disappear. Like if you have a sociopath, you won't catch him. he's gone in the night. So people see him acting the fool, and they decide, well, how come he can be bad? I want to be bad. And so they start being bad to get away with it because it's easier. You can cheat. Why would we do tit for tat? We have the option of cheating. I benefit more immediately, and there's no consequence. Okay, so guys, we gotta make up a consequence. We have to internalize the police force. We have to put it in the minds of the peasants. Otherwise, the peasants will be in constant revolt, like the French. So what do? Well, the moral code comes with them. We also offer them the forgiveness, and most importantly, we teach turning the other cheek. We gotta love thy neighbor. We're no longer taking the neighbor's eyes and teeth if we are wronged. Now we are loving them like Jesus the Christ. It's okay. It's okay, because we will be rewarded in the kingdom of heaven. That's not right now. That's much later. But I promise it's coming. There will be a return on investment. And so that system was very effective when you have thousands of illiterate peasants that you can just put in one big room once a week and re-indoctrinate, So I read all that and I was like, wow, that's wild. That's a wild concept, but it kind of makes sense in its way. I need to see how far this goes. So I decided to read the Bible for that reason. And then the second reason was because I was getting stomped on Jeopardy at the religious questions, which that affected me very deeply because I was so good at arguing these religious points with Repent America, because they don't actually know that much about religion. They just have very strong feelings. So I could bring up like that Satan killed 10 people and God killed way more, the world technically. And I could bring up the story of Elijah and the she-bears and call them bald, It was, like, we could go all day. And of course they didn't have any answers for that because Repent America didn't think that deeply. They just want to yell at young women. So, but I knew all of these things. But then Jeopardy questions were asking about the saints and these martyrs and the actual acts of Christ, and I couldn't answer them, and that really upset me. So I decided to read it for that purpose. And then I got a personal reason, right? Because the girl I was seeing at the time, we decided to try for a baby. We got pregnant. And at this point, I'm thinking about the person that I was when I was younger, and the person that I was when I was younger is a monster. And I maintain that everyone is kind of a monster in their late teens, early 20s. That's when you figure out how to be a person. That's when your personality is still sort of malleable, and if it's going to be disordered, it's going to stick there. But if not, by the time your brain is done developing, around between 25 and 30, depending, that is when you figure out what flies and what doesn't. It's when you start to learn that doing bad stuff results in bad things, not just for other people, obviously, but for you. what goes around does really come around. And this is the same concept that we brushed on with the development of the New Testament codes, you know, because, yeah, in theory you can get away with it. You can keep drifting from place to place, but you never get away with anything forever. The humans are just too social animals. We're wired for some level of empathy, so you can ignore that. You know, you can pretend you don't feel the empathy, and you can pretend that shame doesn't have an impact on you, and you can divorce yourself from it entirely. You know, you can block out your understanding of the things that you have done, but eventually they will come to collect. It's just how the monkey is wired, unless you are yourself a psychopath. And I don't know if you guys have known many psychopaths. I just, due to not only my current occupation, but my previous friend group, I had the luxury of knowing quite a few. They're not happy. They're not jolly folks. So if their system worked, they would be. When I used to drive around Philly, I used to get road rage real bad, and if you've ever driven in Philly, you know why. One day, I came to the realization that all these people who were making me so mad were themselves way madder. Whatever they were doing, they were on, like, it was the last straw. And I realized that, and this has been since internalized in me as a sort of mantra, the punishment for being a Philadelphian is being a Philadelphian. Yeah, what they're doing is horrible and makes no sense, but, like, imagine the life they have to live. That brought them to that point. Go Birds! Thought about the things that I did. And I thought that maybe if I had had a code of my own, it wouldn't have been so hard for me for so long. Because, yeah, I got away with stuff all the time. I was running around, ripping and roaring, and I was just hopping from girl to girl, and I was getting into fist fights all the time, and I was just working the room. I was manipulating people. I was doing all sorts of drugs. I was stealing. I stole so much, dude. I just ran down the whole, pretty much every commandment except killing was broken summarily and repeatedly and, like, gleefully. I was gross about it. I was self-aggrandized. You know, I thought everything was going great. I was a god unto my own right. But, like, I was not a happy camper. You know? I'd get these sudden explosive bouts of melancholy all of a sudden, and I couldn't understand why. Because ostensibly everything is going great. You know? I had everything that I believed that I wanted at the time, you know? Just hot and cold running pleasure on tap, so why wasn't I happy? What's the problem? Where's the happiness? Turns out that's not how you become happy. Who knew? I thought about this, and I thought about the things that I'd done, and I felt bad. No, I didn't do anything, you know, federal. You know? Like, my sins were many and myriad, but relatively small. Like, there's nothing that's going to haunt me on my deathbed that I'm aware of. But I had still fancied myself a bad person. And especially now that I'm thinking about bringing a son into the world. Because I suffered for so long. And I don't want this kid to have to suffer. So what do? Well, maybe if he gets a code from the jump, he doesn't have to develop one over the first 30 years of his life. And that way, things can be easier. He doesn't have to go through the same misery that I did for as long. Seems like it might work. And so I'm scheming on this, and it's saying, yeah, you can do worse than the 10 Commandments. And then at this point, I get a new job up at the rehab. Scored a gig at the rehab, and I'm going to see how they run all the groups. And one of the groups that I'm sitting in on is the devotions, and God versus religion, and faith and recovery, you know? And the God that they're talking about, very different from the dude that I had heard maligned my entire childhood. It's like, man, there's not a lot of fire and brimstone with these guys. This is just pretty direct. Okay, let's try it. So I started reading the Bible, and I supplement it with church, and that was actually, that would go on to become a point of contention between me and the ex, because she thought that it was an excuse that I was using to sneak out of the house and cheat on her. I never have, just to clarify. But I get why, because 15 years ago I probably would have, because I was a bad person. Let's bring it back to the book I'm actually supposed to be reviewing here, rather than just sharing my tragic origin story, huh? We lose the baby at 7 months, and the relationship doesn't last much longer after that. And part of it is obviously the grief, but a lot of it is I am now in a situation to start to notice things that I had been refusing to allow myself to notice previously, you know? And it's distasteful to air that kind of dirty laundry on a public forum like this. But suffice it to say that some of her behaviors were dangerous, and the kind of thing that I wouldn't want to expose a child to, let alone have that child pick up and embody. You know, it could really be ruining his life too. Comes to a breaking point a few months later, a few months more grieving, you know, a few months more constant fighting. And I'm like, hey, I can't do this anymore. In light of new developments, I can't be subjecting myself, or God forbid kids, to this. I gotta go. So I went. Out the other side of it, I'm still sort of in that frame in my mind, trying to think about what is good and what is bad. You know, what, like, I was a bad person. I did these horrible things, and I was able to justify it. And I was seeing some of that reflected in more recent times, and always with the justifications. So how do you reconcile that? You know, with it being so provided in such sharp relief for me in the present, I was able to see my own horrible behavior in the past. Well, granted, the distant past, but still enough that I identified with it. It was part of me and who I was, and the things that I justified and thought I could get away with. So, how do you get over the fact that you're a bad person? Even if you're trying real hard not to be anymore, even if you're better now, you know? You were. So what do you do with that? Well, it depends who you talk to. If you go in for the religious stuff, then there's a whole lot of forgiveness going on, a whole lot of repentance. But, like, I don't know these people, and what did their forgiveness matter to me? You know, like, why does a priest need to forgive me? Why does a therapist need to absolve me? They don't have the authority to do that, in theory. And again, if you go in for the religious thing, that's only going to come from God. And I don't need to go into a big building for that, in theory, right? I know it's a Protestant take, excuse me. But it just seems true to me. And of no particular value, because we're talking about this guy who's all loving, all forgiving. He's forgave me already, so I don't feel any better. Nothing's better. So what do you do? What's the solution? How do I actually address it? Well, that is where how to stubbornly refuse to make yourself miserable at anything. Yes, anything comes in. Albert Ellis, he invented REBT, Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, which went on to inspire CBT, which, if you know anything about anything, you know that is the gold standard for treating everything, because it is highly chartable, it makes sense, it works quickly, and insurance companies love it. And they're the ones who are, you know, the golden rule. Make the gold. They have the gold, make the rules. So CBT is the hotness. CBT is what everybody uses for everything because it's so immediately effective, and it comes from REBT. So the idea behind REBT is you look at your beliefs, the thoughts, the reflexes that you have, and you try to identify whether or not they are rational. And a rational belief will lead you to feelings that are either preferences or concerns. So listen to those words, right? Preferences, I prefer. concerns. I am concerned about. These are very down tempo, you know? These are low volatility. These are safe. These are safe emotions to feel. It is safe to have preferences. It is safe. If you would prefer one thing over another, you're not having a nervous breakdown about it. If you have concerns about something, that's not a panic attack. You don't concern yourself into a panic attack. You worry and you fret and you hyperventilate and that's a panic attack. You don't have that with concern. Concern is much more subtle. And these subtle emotions give rise to rational lines of thinking. Whereas these more explosive emotions give rise to irrational lines of thinking. And it creates a feedback loop where the more you indulge in these petty and childish emotions, the more irrational you're going to think. And the more irrationally you think, the more it reinforces the use of these volatile emotions, right? So the idea behind REBT and subsequently CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, by the way, if somehow you haven't encountered that before. The way that it is addressed in REBT is to pick it apart. Whenever you have this response, you say, okay, what evidence do I have that this is true? This is a feeling that I have, and it comes with a must or a should, because it wouldn't be irrational if it didn't. Irrational feelings are always attached to a must or a should. I must do this. They mustn't do that. I should have done this. They should treat me better. Ba-da-da. Musts and shoulds and always and nevers are all fake. They're all made up. It's ridiculous. It's your brain just being dramatic. And if you can pick out where a must or a should would go, and this is important because once you start looking for it, your brain will try to work around it. And I'm like, no, I have to. That's the same thing. I need to. That's the same thing. You don't need to. You need food and water and sleep and shelter. Shut up. You don't need to. You don't need a new promotion. You're doing fine without the promotion. But you would prefer the promotion, right? So that's rational. I'm up for a promotion. I would really prefer if I got it. I'm concerned that I might not. Those are rational emotions. That's fine. You can have preferences. You can have feelings. Feelings are normal to have. I need to have this promotion or my life will fall apart if I don't. That's completely irrational. We have no proof that your life will fall apart if you don't have that, if you don't get that promotion. First of all, you don't have the promotion right now, and you're doing just fine. In fact, you're doing so good, you're being considered for promotion. What more do you want? Well, if I don't get this promotion, then it's evidence that my boss doesn't like me. Okay, first of all, we don't have that evidence. There are many reasons that you might not get the promotion. Second of all, you can't read your boss's mind. Boss can't possibly be disliking everybody that the boss passes over for the promotion unless the boss is themselves miserable. There's nothing you can do about that either. Third, who cares? Who cares if the boss doesn't like you? It's not your job to make the boss like you. It's your job to do your job, and you're doing your job enough that you're being considered for promotion. So shut up, right? So that's REBT. You look at the logic behind what compels your emotions, and you shut it down if it's illogical. And you argue with it. And I love Albert Ellis. I watched his some videos of him back when I was in school, and he was my favorite. I forgot he was my favorite because he'd sit there with his client and they'd just be chain smoking, and he's just arguing with them about what they're saying is ridiculous. And I remember seeing this, and I was like, yo, this whole time there's a form of therapy where you just argue with people like Socrates until they get it. That's incredible. I'd be so good at that. And I am. But it's fallen out of favor because it's been largely replaced by CBT, which is more hands-off. And that makes sense because REBT is less soft and cuddly than CBT. I mean, they're both kind of, dry and sterile, but they're also immediately effective because they take all of the witchy guesswork, all the bone shaking out of psychology. It's very direct. Stimulus response. It's almost like behaviorism. These are the thoughts that are poisoning your life. What do we do with them? We get rid of them. We identify to see if they're poison, and if they're poison, we chop them out. They're gone. And that's phenomenal. And one of the things, tying this all back together, here it is, right? Final point. One of the things that really brought this home for me, that made this an excellent bookend in conjunction with the verse a day Bible that I had read, is that I had been obsessing over the bad person that I was for so long, and how to ensure that I'm not a bad person anymore. How moving forward, how to be good. I want to be good. How do you be good? Because I have to demonstrate what good looks like in order to pass it on to the next generation. You have to model behavior for kids, otherwise kids aren't just going to get there. The kids are going to do whatever you do. So you have to be sure you got it together before you bring a kid into it. You got to be sure that what you're passing on, that you got rid of as many of your own little quirks and traumas as you possibly can, because you don't want the kid to inherit that. So how do I make sure that they're inheriting good? How do I make myself good? And our boy Albert Ellis resolved this for me, because he said very plainly, that's fake too. There are no good people. There are no bad people. There are just people. And they do good things and they do bad things. Those are just behaviors. So in a moment, you can choose to do good things, and you can choose to do bad things. Moment to moment to moment, you make this choice over and over again. But there's no cosmic karma chart that you need to be considering. That's crazy making. That's just something for you to obsess and flagellate over. It's indulgent. It's self-indulgent. It's narcissism. To think, what if I'm not a good enough person? By whose judgment, dude? Who's making this call? Who has this celestial bingo card? God, the all-forgiving one? You'll be good. Odin? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you're ascribing this judgment to. Anubis is not there weighing your heart against a feather. But if you continue to be horrible, if you continue to do horrible behaviors to the point that it becomes habitual for you, you're going to hurt everyone around you and destroy your own life. That's beautiful. That's golden for me. And that just brought everything right into alignment. I was like, okay, so I don't need to worry about all of this. Obviously we must still pursue good, and that perfection is unattainable is no excuse not to strive for it, and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, I don't have to worry about what it means about me as a person, because that's irrational. It's fake. It's a waste of time. What's important is right now, moment to moment. And that's what I love about REBT. It gets away from all of the abstractions of the past and leans into sort of the same thing that you'll see in acceptance and commitment therapy, which I'm sure was inspired by REBT, where it's talking about how what's past is past, and okay, that's fine. I'm sorry. Yeah, ACT and also Adler. What's past is past, okay, that's fine. But you're making a choice moment to moment. So if you're choosing to drag your past into the future and letting it cause you to do this damage to other people, then you're doing bad. You might have an excuse, you might have this victimhood that you can fall back on, but it's your choice every time, every moment of every day, because this is the only place where we can make a choice. This mindful moment is the only time that we can do anything, right? Because the past is gone and we can't even globally decide on it anyway, because history is written by the victors. And read 1984. You want to talk about how reliable the past is. And then, not to mention that it's filtered through our perceptions and colored by our emotional memories. So even our recall of the past isn't that accurate. And that can be sussed out and proven by the people who, if you ever get eyewitness accounts, if you read the statistics on eyewitness accounts, overwhelmingly they can be altered by implantation. So whatever the cops say to the eyewitnesses will change exactly what they remember, and they see it in their head because the past is so subject to change. And the future, there might not even be a future. When I was a kid, I was like 5. I was watching Terminator 2, right? Way too young to be watching Terminator 2, but it's a spectacular movie. I was watching it with my dad, and it was at the part where, right in the beginning, where Sarah Connor is hanging on the fence and the little kids are playing in the park, and the Skynet drops the nuke, and it's a mushroom cloud in the distance, and the wave of the atomic, the blast rolls out from the center, and she's screaming, and everything is just liquefied. It's all turned to dust, and she's skeletonized and then blasted off the gate. My dad turns to me and says, that can happen at any time. So we are not promised a future. That can happen at any time. Oh, I see it now. Yep, it's dropping. It's the fog. Here comes the fog. So there is no past and there is no future. So it doesn't matter what happened in the past. And it doesn't matter who or what you were. What matters is what you're doing right now in this moment. And you can choose to be good, but all you're going to do to that end is do good behaviors over and over again. Until that is how people identify you. But that doesn't make you good. Just as doing bad behavior doesn't make you bad. Well, other people might think it. They might be, that dude, he does bad things all the time, And so if you're for heuristic purposes, they might, block it up as, he's a bad dude. Let's steer clear. But, that doesn't mean you necessarily are. So who cares? Just do what you do. And try to do your best. And it seems so obvious and silly, but it blew me away when I read it, So, 5 stars to my man Albert Ellis, obviously. Turns out he has written 100 other books, so I'm going to read a couple more of them. But I'm probably not going to review as many of them, because they're all going to say the same thing, because RABT is a fairly precise tool. There's not a lot going on there. So that's my year in review. That's where I started, that's where I ended, and I am going to try to carry this idea of preferences and concerns into the new year, because it just seems a lot more rational. Alright, thanks for tuning in. Like, follow, subscribe, and I don't remember if I told you, but I'm going to tell you right now, I nailed that 150, lads. That's, again, gender neutral, lads. We're all lads under the Lord. I got the 150 on Goodreads, and I wouldn't have made it if I hadn't forced you all to be my accountability buddies. If it weren't for the fact that I knew that I've been telling people that I was going for 150 for the entirety of the last 2 months, I think it was, then I definitely wouldn't have made it. And it was a grind right at the last week. Just made it under the wire. But I made it. And for next year, I think I set it to 122. And that is because I'm doing a lot more writing now. And 122 is approximately, rounded up, but it is what happens if you read a book every 3 days. And that seems like a pretty reasonable clip to move along. So how about you? How about you, YouTube community? How about you, booktubers? What are you reading this year? What is your goals, your resolutions in terms of your bookishness? You want to talk about it? Let me know. We can talk about it in the comments. Maybe we can talk about it in a video. See if I care. Who knows what the future holds? All right. Like, follow, subscribe. See you next time.